The classroom went silent the moment the door creaked open, the kind of silence that doesn't feel calm but loaded, like a held breath before a storm. 20 pairs of eyes tracked the new teacher as he stepped inside, chalk dust floating in the sunlight behind him. If you've ever wondered how fast a room can turn hostile, stay with this story until the very end, because what happened next unfolded in just 60 seconds and left everyone changed. Before we dive in, if stories about courage, justice, and unexpected strength move you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps bring more powerful stories like this to life. The teacher set his worn leather bag on the desk and smiled, unaware of the quiet signals already passing between the back row's smirks, elbow nudges, the scrape of a chair. He introduced himself softly, voice steady but new, the kind of calm that hasn't yet learned the shape of the room. The bullies had. They always did. This class had chewed through substitutes and driven off veterans, and they had decided, before he'd written his name on the board, that he would break too. A paper ball asked across the aisle and burst near the front. Laughter fluttered and died as he turned, eyebrow raised, not angry, just observant. He wrote his name anyway. Another noise, metal tapping wood, rang out as someone kicked a desk leg. He paused, looked at the culprit, and nodded as if acknowledging a comment. That nod unsettled them more than a shout would have. The leader of the group leaned back, boots hooked on the chair in front of him, and whispered something that sent a ripple of snickers through the row. The teacher didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten detention. He simply asked a question, clear, measured, about the lesson he planned to teach, inviting answers as though respect were a given. That assumption felt like a challenge. A chair scraped hard. A book slammed shut. The leader stood, towering, and mocked the teacher's calm with a slow clap. The room tightened. This was the moment teachers usually lost their temper or their nerve. The teacher walked closer instead, closing the distance without haste, his eyes level, his posture relaxed. He asked the student to sit, not as a command, but as an expectation. The student laughed and didn't move. A phone buzzed, someone started recording. The teacher glanced at the phone, then back to the student, and said quietly that the rules applied to everyone, including him. The laughter thinned. The teacher picked up the chalk and drew a small circle on the board, then another beside it, explaining, still calmly, how pressure works, how systems collapse when force is applied without control. It sounded like a lesson, it felt like a warning. The leader scoffed and stepped forward, invading the teacher's space. The teacher didn't flinch. He spoke about choices, about consequences that arrive faster than people expect, about how respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. The words were ordinary, but the way he said them made the room listen. He asked the student to sit again. This time, the student hesitated. 60 seconds hadn't passed yet, but something had shifted. The bullies sensed it, the way animals sense a change in weather. The teacher's calm wasn't weakness, it was control. He wasn't here to break. He was here to teach, and he knew exactly how to handle pressure. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but in that instant the room changed its mind about who held the power. The leader's smirk faltered, not enough for his friends to notice at first, but enough for the teacher to see. He stepped back toward the board, not retreating, resetting the space, then placed the chalk down with deliberate care. "Sit," he said again, voice still even, now edged with certainty. Chairs creaked as a few students straightened, unsure why they were obeying before the command was meant for them. The leader scoffed and finally dropped into his seat. The sound loud, defiant, but his eyes tracked the teacher in a way they hadn't before. The teacher didn't gloat. He didn't call attention to the win. He began the lesson, weaving the earlier disruption into it, talking about limits and responsibility as if it were always the plan. The bullies whispered, testing the edges, tossing small disruptions like pebbles at glass. Each time, the teacher addressed it without naming names, redirecting the room with questions that demanded thought. He asked the class to solve a problem together, then invited the leader to the board, not as punishment, but participation. Laughter bubbled and died when the teacher waited patient, hands folded. The leader walked up, chalk tapping nervously against his fingers, and scribbled a wrong answer. The teacher nodded, thanked him, and asked the class why it didn't work. No ridicule, no humiliation. The correction came from peers, not authority, and it stung deeper. The teacher moved on, keeping the pace brisk, denying the bullies the oxygen of attention. Frustration grew, tactics escalated. A book dropped. A comment turned sharp. The teacher paused the lesson and looked around, not angry, disappointed. He spoke about time, about how 60 seconds can decide a reputation, a future, a path. He shared a story, brief and personal, about a classroom like this one, about a student who learned too late that bravado is expensive. The room listened despite itself. Phones lowered. The bell hadn't rung, but the noise outside faded. The leader shifted, jaw tight, and tried again, louder, crueler this time, aiming for laughter. The teacher met it with a question that cut clean. "What are you trying to prove?" The room went still. The leader's friends glanced away. The teacher didn't wait for an answer. He explained that strength isn't volume, that control is quieter, that forgiveness begins when you choose it, not when you're forced. He invited the class to take a breath with him. Absurd, and yet they did. In the back, someone whispered, "This isn't working." The leader felt it too. He stood again, anger flaring, and for a split second it looked like the old ending. The shove, the shout, the spiral. The teacher raised a hand, not to stop him, but to anchor the room. "We can end this now," he said softly, "or we can learn something." The words hung there heavy. The leader's shoulders sagged, confusion bleeding into his bravado. He looked around and saw not an audience, but witnesses. He sat. The teacher resumed the lesson, steady as before, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone knew it had. In less than 60 seconds, the bullies' script had torn, and they were scrambling to find the next line. By the time the bell finally rang, the room felt like it had survived a quiet earthquake. No obvious wreckage, but everything subtly rearranged. Students filed out slower than usual, glancing back at the teacher as if expecting the spell to break once they crossed the threshold. The bullies lingered, clustered near the door, whispering with forced laughter that fooled no one. The leader stayed seated, staring at the board where the small chalk circles still lingered like a diagram of his own unraveling. When the room emptied, the teacher erased the board with careful strokes, not rushing, letting the silence do its work. He gathered his bag, then paused as footsteps approached. It was the leader, shoulders stiff, eyes flicking between defiance and something dangerously close to shame. He muttered something that might have been an insult if it weren't so tired. The teacher listened without interrupting, then asked him to sit. Not as an order, an invitation. The boy hesitated, then sat. The teacher spoke about boundaries, about how anger is a language people use when they don't have better words, about how classrooms are mirrors. What you bring shows up bigger than you expect. The boy snapped back, listing every reason teachers didn't last here, every way the system failed him first. The teacher didn't deny it. He acknowledged the hurt, named it, then drew a line between explanation and excuse. "You're not powerless," he said, "but you're responsible." The boy's jaw clenched. Responsibility was heavier than rebellion. The teacher ended the conversation gently, telling him tomorrow would be a fresh start, if he wanted it. The boy left without replying. Outside, his friends demanded a story of victory. He shrugged and gave them noise instead of truth. The day moved on, but the classroom didn't forget. Word spread, distorted and amplified. The new teacher didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't break. He waited. The next class tested him harder. Notes passed. Chairs scraped. A whispered chant rose and fell. He responded with structure, clear expectations, fair consequences, no drama. He called home when needed, not to punish but to partner. He praised publicly and corrected privately. The bullies tried new angles, sarcasm instead of sabotage, indifference instead of defiance. He adapted without comment. Days turned into weeks, and the room began to change. Not because fear had taken root, but because predictability had. Students learned that chaos wouldn't get a reaction, but effort would get attention. The leader watched it happen, conflicted. His influence slipped as the currency shifted. The applause he used to command evaporated when the audience stopped clapping. He tried to reclaim it with sharper jokes, riskier stunts. The teacher intervened early, calmly, cutting the fuse before it reached the spark. One afternoon, the leader crossed a line, mocking another student, louder than necessary. The teacher stopped the class and asked the leader to step outside. In the hallway, the teacher didn't lecture. He asked the leader to name what he felt. The boy struggled, then spat out, "Bored." The teacher nodded. Boredom is loud when you're avoiding something. He offered choices, help with a project, leadership in a group, time after class to talk. The boy scoffed, but his eyes lingered on the options. Back inside, the class watched for fireworks that never came. Weeks later, the school held an assembly. The leader skipped it and ended up in the teacher's room, slumped in a chair, scrolling on his phone. The teacher asked him to help set up. He did, grudgingly at first, then with growing competence. They worked in silence until the boy asked, suddenly, why the teacher stayed. The teacher told a story about a moment long ago when someone had chosen patience over power and it changed the trajectory of his life. The boy listened, quiet. Another day, another choice. Then came the incident that could have ended everything. A rumor spiraled online overnight, dragging the teacher's name through speculation and half-truths. Screenshots circulated. Snickers followed him down the hall. Administration called him in. The bullies smelled blood and circled. In class, the leader watched closely, waiting for the crack. The teacher addressed it head-on, briefly, professionally, then taught as planned. He refused to perform his defense for an audience. Evidence surfaced by lunch. The rumor collapsed under its own weight. The room exhaled. The leader felt something unfamiliar, respect not demanded, but earned. That afternoon, the leader stayed after class again, this time by choice. He apologized, awkward, incomplete but real. The teacher accepted without ceremony, reminding him that apologies matter most when followed by change. The next day, when a different student tried to provoke a scene, the leader shut it down with a look. His friends noticed. Some drifted away. Others followed. The room recalibrated. The teacher continued to teach, never referencing the 60 seconds that had started it all, never claiming victory. But the students counted them anyway, replaying the moment when control beat chaos, when forgiveness became an option instead of a plea. By the end of the term, the leader stood at the back of the room during presentations, hands clasped, listening. He didn't clap the loudest. He didn't need to. The teacher watched, proud and careful, knowing that strength isn't proven once, it's practiced. And the class, once notorious, became quietly functional. Not perfect. Human. The kind of room where breaking wasn't inevitable, and forgiveness didn't have to be begged for. Because it was offered before the fall. The final weeks of the term arrived without fanfare, slipping in on ordinary mornings that felt somehow lighter. The classroom had found a rhythm. Imperfect, human, but steady. The desks no longer scraped in defiance. Laughter returned in appropriate places. Questions surfaced that showed curiosity instead of challenge. The teacher noticed it in small ways. Eyes up instead of down, hands raised instead of fists clenched. The quiet confidence of a room that trusted itself. The leader, no longer wearing the title like armor, sat among his peers, contributing when it mattered, silent when it didn't. He wasn't transformed overnight. Change rarely works that way. But he had learned the weight of his choices and the power of restraint. One afternoon, a substitute wandered past and paused at the door, surprised by the calm. "This used to be a tough class," she whispered. The teacher smiled and said nothing. He understood that the victory wasn't his alone. It belonged to every student who decided, again and again, to try something different. On the last day, the bell rang and no one rushed for the door. Papers were stacked, chairs straightened. The leader approached the desk with a folded note, face red, voice low. He thanked the teacher for not giving up when it would have been easier to push back or walk away. The teacher accepted the note without opening it, meeting the student's eyes and nodding. "Keep choosing," he said. The room emptied, leaving the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the chalk-dusted board. The teacher sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle. 60 seconds had started it, a choice to remain calm when chaos demanded reaction. Months had finished it, 1,000 small decisions layered into trust. Outside, students spilled into the hallway, laughing, planning, moving forward. The leader blended into the crowd, no longer the loudest, no longer the center, but steadier for it. The teacher packed his bag and turned off the lights, knowing tomorrow would bring new rooms, new tests, new chances to choose patience over power. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that strength can be gentle and forgiveness can arrive before fear, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter, and sharing them helps keep courage contagious.